Marx came of age in the 19th century in Europe at a time when there were tremendous changes. The French Revolution, which happened about 20 years prior to his birth, upended the system that had been in place for thousands of years, where there were kings, nobility, priests, and the peasantry. In its place, the idea of kings was being swept away and replaced with a new system, one where there were people who owned factories and people who worked in factories. There were a few people living in rural areas, but technology improvements had made it so that a few people could produce a lot of food and other agricultural products. The group of people who had real political power were an emerging set of individuals who owned all of the factories and ways of distributing products, what Marx termed the bourgeoisie. These people who had to work in these factories had no power and no say in their wages or working conditions, often working 70 hours a week, with no control over their work, were termed the proletariat. Marx examined the tension between these owners and workers in Manchester, England in the mid-19th century. He developed his theory of social class. A person is not just middle class or upper class. We tend to think of these as specific fixed positions that we're born into. But for Marx, a person's class position then is in relation to what Marx termed the means or forces of production. What are these? It takes raw materials and machines to process these raw materials into finished goods, technology, factories, and land to build the factories on. These are all known as capital. So your class position, whether you were a member of this owner or bourgeoisie class or a member of this worker or proletariat class, is contingent on whether you own any of these things needed to produce. This relationship was, for Marx, inherently unequal. And capitalism, those things we need to produce, are termed fixed or variable capital. This new system, the capitalist system, was unequal. He used history as an example, and it was always for Marx the way that people were aligned in terms of their ownership or lack of ownership. They were always unequal, whether it was the king who owned everything, or a slave owner, or a capitalist. Marx said, "Men make their own history. They do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly found, given, and transmitted from the past." We think and act within the circumstances related to the forces and relationships of production, the available technology to extract and develop resources, and the property relations that govern ownership of resources independent of what we think or believe. This extraction and development of resources is termed materialism. Don't get this confused with the colloquial meaning of the word. So at the base of all society are economic relationships. They dictate all the other institutions: religions, family, legal, political systems, cultural products, music, art. They also affect human consciousness. How we think about the world is a function of our relationship to these means of production, our consciousness. Marx did not just want to describe and analyze the world, he wanted to develop a system where this historical cycle of inequality would end. The replacement of a capitalist relation of ownership and labor, where the laborers were to own the forces and means of production, was his goal. But there's a consciousness aspect again. For Marx, relationships between the owners and workers were inherently antagonistic. Why? For the owners to ensure a rational goal, profits, they had to extract value from the workers above and beyond the value of the work that the workers were putting out. In other words, the value of a product had as part of its cost or added or surplus value or profit that the owners would take and which of the workers would not get a share. Workers, in other words, are paid less than the full value of the work they're doing. Think about a fast food restaurant where the workers are making minimum wage, net of the cost of the product, those physical capital that we talked about above. The workers do not split up the drawer at the end of the day. They're only paid a fraction of what the drawer yields in net. The rest goes to profit the owner class. The worker does not then receive the full value or regular value of their work. The money that their work generates, but which is put into the hands of the owners and which the worker does not see, is surplus of value. Marx termed as working for someone other than yourself and not seeing the full value of your work, alienation. The subject of this week's response paper. Alienated labor is labor whereby you do not see the full value of your work, the worker under capitalism. Marx thought that a workers' revolution would upturn this capitalist system and replace it with one that was worker-oriented, where workers became aware of their common interest in relation to both physical capital and the antagonistic relations that they had toward those who were extracting their surplus labor from them, and would rise up. But most workers falsely view their interest as being the same as those folks who own everything. This is known as false consciousness. Was Marx correct? There might be some debate. If you've ever worked at a job that sucked, only for a paycheck, and watched a clock, you've experienced alienated labor. Reflect on it as you write your first response paper.